Michael de Laine of the Copenhagen Voice at a meeting about the European Union and human rights. With me is Charlotte Dent-Pedersen of the Danish Human Rights Institute of Human Rights and Dan Hinsgaard from Amnesty International in Denmark. We have had a war for human rights for about 50, 60 years. Are we winning that war?
Well, we are winning, we are confident, but in the last 10 years, alongside the so-called war on terror, we have seen setbacks, and we've certainly, in the context of this meeting, where we've been discussing foreign policy of the European Union, we've seen a number of countries like Russia and China being able to actually use the war on terror or the fight against terrorism as an excuse for oppressing minorities and secessionist parts of their countries, like in Chechnya and in Xinjiang province of China. So we are, let's say, we've had some serious setbacks in the last 50 years. We are confident, however, that in the long term we will be winning.
From your point of view, what are the greatest problems in human rights in Europe and in the world?
I think the greatest problem in Europe is probably the whole issue around discrimination, and then it's the issue around social protection and space, which is not sufficient, and often you have underlying discrimination grounds behind the lack of social protection, and the fact that you have not defined poverty as being, poverty being incapacitated to actually move yourself forward. So that the greatest human rights problems in Europe is I see discrimination and the whole issue around nationality that will continue to be a big human rights problem. Another factor which is related to that is the issue around migration and the factors in migration. I think we have a problem in seeing positive migration, and there are positive tendencies in migration that we don't look at. We only tend to look at the negative instead of looking at the positive side. So migration, discrimination, and then I would see that, like answering the question you asked Dan before, I think sometimes we have a tendency not to see the issue around democracy. Of course, human rights and democracy are not the same, but in order to have a democratic state, you have to uphold human rights. And one of the most difficult disciplines, I think, for leaders in Russia and China is actually the whole issue around democracy and having democratic processes, respecting that and integrating the views of minorities. I think that's something that we in the old Europe, in the new Europe, and in the new states have to continuously work at. How do we actually manage democracy?
Do you agree on that situation?
Well, I agree, certainly, and definitely the issue of discrimination in Europe we also regard as the key sort of human rights challenge for Europe. I think you look at it worldwide, I think Charlotte said a bit about the same thing, but we find it very important now that we meaning NGOs but also states, do a better job in really trying to empower people to fight for their own rights, not just their political and civil political rights, which has been the tradition, but also their social, cultural, and economic rights. We're working now a lot, for instance, with maternal mortality. This is one of the big death causes for women in the global south. Women who are not being allowed even to have access to health due to illegal pregnancy, so to speak. So this issue about social and economic rights, as treating that as a human right and providing means for people to fight for them, and which actually requires the political rights and the civil rights. So things are connected, and I think we have a big job in trying to let's explain to people, even in our own constituencies, what is this about, why are these two sort of rights interlinked, and how can they support each other?
So human rights has developed from being, as it were, looking after the position of people who have been imprisoned for political or claimed political problems, to a far wider area.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you can say the symbol of a human rights victim 20, 30 years ago was, I don't know, Nelson Mandela or somebody wrongfully, kept in prison or tortured. Or Sakharov, indeed. And I think maybe just a few years from now, the sort of iconic person representing a victim of human rights abuses would be a woman in the third world who can't feed her children. I mean, that is a fundamental human right that we have yet to convince our government and the EU government and the EU institutions that this is actually a key human rights issue. It's poverty in the global south, and human rights is closely interlinked, and we have to be better at explaining and arguing that.
Well,
yeah, and it's also about that the state has some obligations in the human rights setting, and taking these obligations seriously. And that is one thing, is to secure that the person on the street has the ability to provide for its own health, housing, food, and all these things. So it's a relationship between the individual, the rights holder, and the duty bearer, the state, in terms of providing for these things. And if you can't provide for them, ask for them so that they can be provided for. That is really the new human rights framework.
But that also requires that the recipients have an education so they know where to go and how to apply.
To demand for it and to participate in the development of their own lives.
How do you see Denmark and the EU working for human rights? Are they doing enough?
I don't see that at the moment. I was very happy for the fact that Lena Espersen participated with the Germans in putting the EU policy on human rights forward. I think that is really, really good. I think that we still have a good name in the UN system in terms of promoting in relation to torture and supporting the special rapporteur on torture, for example. So we still have a very good name. But I think we have a tendency to forget where we came from, the basic principles, that it can happen again, what happened, that there is a reason for why we have rule of law, why we have certain guarantees in terms of the justice system. And therefore, we need a sort of a new debate around these principles. Why did we have them? And there Denmark can play a role also in terms of the other European states.
Well, I agree very much with the analysis, and we just add that we see the EU and the sort of European government's relationship with sort of bigger strategic partners like Russia and China is not really being very consistent. We would like to see hardcore public criticism whenever there's a human rights violation going on, but at the same time working very practical on technical assistance and help. With regard to our closest allies in the United States, we have felt that over the last few years, the European governments and the EU has really closed their eyes and ears about the sort of excesses that were happening under the pretext of fighting terrorism and in Afghanistan and Iraq and so on. So we really urge the EU and the Danish government to really get investigations going, what happened, so we can learn from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again, because Europe used to be and is still, I think, the key sort of region for promoting human rights in the world.
We will have a parliamentary election here in Denmark sometime this year. How large a role will human rights play in the electioneering?
Well, we're pundits as well. I think they are here even if they're not named human rights, because I think the issue of immigration, the issues of particularly Muslims will play a role here. There is, I think, if you read the papers and stuff like that now, I think it's a lot about the